It's been an awesome day for you if you're a USC fan because they had an absolutely sensational day in terms of being on the recruiting trail. And it's really a testament to the adversity that Lincoln Riley and Chad Bowden have faced since, the end of the 2024 campaign. Because, I go back and I think about that season and there were some really heartbreaking losses. And at least for me, the most memorable one was when they lost to Maryland in those closing minutes. But for them to be able to bounce back from that horrible 2024 season where some people were even calling for Lincoln Riley to get fired, to be able to bounce back, regroup, and finish with a relatively strong 9-3 campaign. They're just an Oregon victory away from arguably being in the college football playoff. And now fast forward to signing day 2025, or fast forward to 2026, and here we are with USC having the best recruiting class in the entire country, if you ask me. And it's a testament to how aggressive that they've been in terms of recruiting, because I think that's one of the criticisms that Lincoln Riley has gotten since he's gotten to USC is not only has he been recruiting well enough, but not particularly in the state of California as well, which is something that Chad Bowden definitely emphasized when he spoke with 24/7 Sports and kind of elaborated on what their game plan was in terms of, propelling USC to, being at top of the Big Ten, right? Because, I think of the eras of Pete Carroll, for example, and how they absolutely dominated recruiting. A lot of times they would have number one recruiting classes, and this is the first time since 2007 that they were able to replicate that. And it's also the first time since the 2008 cycle where a team not in the SEC has won recruiting. And when I mean one, I just mean in first. But recruiting is always subjective too, right? I mean, you don't want to get too caught up in the recruiting aspect of it, but it's a good baseline to kind of see where commits are going, why are they going there, and what are kind of the trends in terms of where they're getting players from, what certain positions they could be targeting, and how that translates later when they get the transfer portal too. And it's really just been an exciting time for him too, right? Because there is a lot of exciting kids who are on this roster this year. I mean, Makai Lemon, to me, should definitely be a candidate for the Bolikoff Award. 1,156 yards this year, just an absolute beast. Somebody that if I were a defending team, I would constantly be making sure that he's double covered. And then you have Jaden Mayava, who threw for just shy of 3,500 yards, 66% completion percentage, and 23 touchdowns to 8 interceptions on the year. And I think the one thing I really admired about him was his willingness to take chances, playing relatively poised, underrated athletically, and also has a way better arm than people give him credit for. And I think the one thing that Lincoln Riley and this offensive staff really did a phenomenal job with Mayava is they allowed him to make some mistakes. I feel like he looked really comfortable out there. And granted, I think if you're USC, you would like to have a little bit more productivity from your rushing attack. I mean, King Miller was their leading rusher with less than 1,000 yards this year. I think he had about 875 yards or something like that. So I think there is definitely some potential for them to bring in a running back, possibly in the transfer portal, to kind of be the running back for next season. But, when I look at this recruiting class too, I mean, there's a lot of great guys here. I mean, for starters, Mark Bowman, the tight end from Santa Ana, California, 6'4", 225, 5-star recruit who arguably is one of their top recruits and somebody that I think they're going to utilize significantly going into next year. And also, too, shout out to Ethan Fester and Luke Waffle, an edge rusher out of Princeton, New Jersey, and also out of Ethan Fester's out of Texas, I believe. But nevertheless, I mean, it's really encouraging to kind of see USC in this position, because I'll be the first one to tell you, this time last year, I was not always a fan of Lincoln Riley on this show. I'll definitely be the first one to admit I've been fairly critical of him, much like the rest of the country was, especially the enormous contract that he got. But nevertheless, I mean, after watching signing day and kind of, going back, looking at some film and kind of seeing where they're at, I just can't help but think to myself how freaking loaded they are, dude. Especially, it's not just the overall class itself. They were also able to sprinkle in some JUCO prospects too, who it's a balancing act, right? Because you don't really know what the reason is for them being JUCO. Sometimes it could just be an issue of just circumstance. It could be an issue of getting kicked off a football team. It could be an issue of I don't know what I want to do with my life. But regardless of what it is, USC is really doing a strong job at just attacking all aspects of recruiting in general because since 2006 the Trojans, they've only signed 3 recruiting classes with 50% of their class not being from California. And this is something I emphasized in my UCLA video that I just did, which has pissed off some UCLA fans. But when you're USC and when you're UCLA, I don't care who your head coach is. I don't care what your season record was before. You have to be able to dominate within the state of California. I cannot stress enough on this channel how many talented kids are in the state of California. And when you're USC and you're the powerhouse program of the entire state, you should be picking off every single 5-star kid that you can possibly find that fits a need and that makes sense for your program. And it seems like Chad Bowden has finally got in Lincoln Riley's head because I've been screaming from the rooftops. I'm like, if USC can just nail recruiting even for just one cycle, there's no reason why they can't put it together and at least make the college football playoff next year. And to think about this too, 18 of those 35 commits are ESPN 300 commits. Now, it depends on if you do 24/7 sports or on 3 or ESPN. I think all of them are pretty solid, but I usually tend to focus more on 3. But nevertheless, I mean, it's just fascinating to kind of see Lincoln Riley's rise in terms of recruiting compared to kind of what we saw from 2001 to 2009 under Pete Carroll. And I think just some stats to kind of emulate and really kind of drive home how significant this is in terms of, USC's future and promise going into next season. Now, per ESPN research, 69% of USC's high school signees from within the state of California in the last 5 cycles. So it's that sediment too, right? Because when you think of those recruiting classes earlier from Lincoln Riley, what was missing from that? What was missing from that is that they weren't recruiting in the state of California. In fact, the only 3 times since 2006 where their class had 50% of kids, less than 50% of kids from California, all under Lincoln Riley. And granted, that does make sense to some degree too, right? Because, when he was at Oklahoma before, I mean, there's a big difference between recruiting in the Big 12 versus recruiting in the Pac-12 or what's now they're under the Big 10. But you get what I mean in that aspect of it, right? Because across those 3 cycles, USC only landed 9 of those 73 ESPN 300 prospects within those 3 cycles before. So I think it's really a significant improvement that USC was able to bring in a general manager like Chad Bowden, someone who even emphasized just how intentional they're going to be, how aggressive they're going to be in terms of bringing in guys that simply just make sense for them. And most importantly, when you're recruiting against, teams like Ohio State, teams like Michigan, teams like UCLA, now you have all the Arizonas you have to worry about, Oregon, Washington. When you're kind of compiling all that together, it's a game of momentum to some degree too, right? Because when you think of the Trojans, a lot of people were kind of questioning in terms of where they would be at. But when you kind of look at the season, you say, you know what, they had another emphatic victory versus UCLA. 9-3, all things considered, I think is a season that you really can't complain about. I mean, it's definitely a season I would be relatively confident about, and especially since it seems like Lincoln Riley, Chad Bowden, and Cohen are all kind of seem together on a collaborative base, and at least financially speaking, the investments, the NIL, all of that's there. There's no reason why USC football didn't just pave the way to themselves to kind of building that foundation, building the groundwork in terms of being able to kind of put that all together, right? And I know that I distressed for a couple minutes there about California recruiting, but they're finding guys all over the country. They've really kind of dove their feet into the state of Florida, which I would argue is the second most difficult place to recruit in the entire country. If you ask me, it's California, South Florida, and the state of Texas. Those are the three that if you're competing in any of those three markets, man, you better have some dough to pony up because it's going to be difficult. And then obviously in the state of Ohio and the state of Illinois too, because I think being in the Big Ten, USC is kind of starting to pivot and be like, you know what, we know that our bread and butter is the state of California. However, we have to be able to prove to these guys that do legitimately want to play for a Big Ten program that we can compete with that at that level. And we understand what the makeup is in order for them to be successful in that regard. But to me, what this really proved is that USC is well positioned to not only be successful for next season, but also beyond that. Next summer, they're anticipating a brand new state-of-the-art $200 million performance center for their athletic department, which I can't say I'm surprised about, and something that you should be excited about if you're a Trojan fan.